Okay. Alright, so how do you think cells receive things that it needs, or how does it transfer stuff out of the cell?
With the cell membrane.
Through the cell membrane, okay? Through the cell membrane. It can move through the cell membrane, and we talked about how the cell membrane is called selectively permeable because it sort of selects what comes in and what goes out of the cell, and the transport of these materials happen through the proteins or through the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, do you remember what type of proteins are on the membrane? Good. Integral proteins and peripheral proteins. Integral proteins are proteins embedded in the membrane, so they're transmembranous. They sort of pass through the whole membrane. Okay. Peripheral proteins are what hang on the side, one side or the other side. Okay, so that's by position. Okay, now by function, the proteins, we can classify the proteins by functions. In other words, we have proteins that function as channel proteins, and others function as pump proteins or protein pumps. Now, what do you think are the difference between channels and pumps? Oh, they are all transport proteins. They help transport things from one side to the other, or from that side to the other side. Okay, so but we can look at channel transport proteins or pump transport proteins. Now the word pump indicates that it's actively pumping something. So actively, like it uses energy to pump something. Okay, whereas channel proteins, it's sort of like open channel, and things just move on its own by diffusion. It just diffuses across. Okay. And so the active transport uses energy, and channel protein, they don't use energy. It just allows that certain material to just pass through or flow in, okay, or flow out. All right. So there are two ways of transport. One is called active transport, and the other is called passive transport. Active transport uses protein pumps and energy. What is that usable form of energy called? ATP. Okay. So active transport uses ATP and pump proteins. Okay. All right. Passive transport does not use ATP, and it only involves channel proteins. Or channel proteins can be gated channels or open channels. But gated channels means like there's sort of a gate or a little flap that works like a gate, and it could close or open. So if it's open, then things can diffuse freely. If it's closed, then it sort of blocks it. Okay, so that's how it regulates that material to come in or not, by closing it or opening it. Alright, so we're going to talk about cell transport. Largely, we'll look at passive transport and active transport. Okay, so let's have a scenario. You guys been observing onion cells and elodias on plant cells, alright? Now, and a day later, the onion pieces got all dried up, alright? Water evaporated and the cells all like shriveled up, okay? What if you take that dried up piece of onion and put it back in the water? What do you think will happen to the cell size? It will expand again, right? It will regain its shape and sort of expand as it gains water. Right? So we're seeing the cell membrane shrinking and expanding, shrinking and expanding. Okay? If you were to take a whole piece of carrot, or like small piece of carrot, and you put it in salt water, what do you imagine will happen to the carrot? If you put the piece of carrot in the salt water, yes, it will shrink because the water will sort of come out of it and it will shrink up, right? If you put then that same piece, save it out of that salt water and put it back in, fresh water, it will probably go back, right, to its original size. Alright, so we're seeing how cell is responding to the solution solution that is sitting in. Okay? So it responds to the solution it's sitting in. How does it gain water or how does it lose water? Well, it's going through or coming in or going out of the cell membrane. Okay, so it's diffusing through the cell membrane. Okay, so that is form of cell transport. That's a form of how water moves in or out of the cell. Okay. Now, can cells get other than water? Yeah, like small ions, like salt, other dissolved ions can move in and out of the cell. All right. Now, they may require specific proteins. Okay. For example, to transport like glucose, it happens through a specific protein. Okay. To transport other kinds of large proteins, it will happen through different protein pumps or protein channels. All right. So, we talked about how the cell membrane is called fluid mosaic model. Okay. It represents that the membrane has lots and lots of different kinds of proteins. So each protein's job is very specific. They may be, one protein may be transporting like glucose, the other is for another substance, another is for something else. And you remember we talked about how proteins, their function is very specific to their shape. Each protein's shape is very different, and their function is depends on its shape. So proteins are very specific. If it's to transport one material, its job is only to transport that. It can't transport something else. All right, but we have lots and lots of different things a cell needs. And so imagine the cell membrane has transport proteins for all of those materials. All right, okay. When the cell then, what are some things that could come in and out besides water? Salt, ions, and other proteins, whatever the cell needs for its life. All right. So let's look at passive transport. Okay. So we have passive transport and active transport. We'll save active transport for later. Now, passive transport is when it does not require energy. And it happens through maybe involving channel proteins or just through the cell membrane, the phospholipid bilayer. Okay? Now the key words that go with passive transport is facilitated diffusion, osmosis, and diffusion. Okay? So these three terms go with passive transport. Alright, let's talk about diffusion. Now, diffusion is like if I were to secretly go to the corner of the room and like spray my favorite perfume, okay, without anybody noticing. Alright, 10 minutes later, Mua will be like, what is this smell, right? So that is form of diffusion. It's just particles spreading out, okay? So it's just spreading out from where there's a lot of those particles in the corner of the room to where there is less, okay? It just spreads to an area of low concentration. Okay, so give me another example of diffusion. Yeah, I like that. If you put food coloring in the water, the dye sort of like spreads throughout. So how is it? Can you tell me about the high concentration to low concentration? Diffusion always moves. Okay, it involves moving things from high concentration to an area of low concentration. So where is the high concentration of the dye? Yeah, exactly. When you first put that drop, that is where it's got high, concentration of the food coloring particles. And over time, when it spreads, okay, it's going to the water spreading throughout the water. That's area of low concentration. Okay, so things diffuse all the time, right? When you smell like the dinner food, the meal, right? The smell is sort of diffusing from where your mom is cooking to rest of the kitchen or the room. This is form of diffusion. Okay, so diffusion. Now osmosis is diffusion of water. All right, so water also behaves the same way. All right, when you have a beaker of water and you spill it, it sort of spreads. Water diffuses. right? It's going from where there was a lot of water to where there's less water. All right, so it's going to from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Now the term osmosis is strictly for water. All right, strictly for water. So let's go back to our example earlier. We said that the shriveled up onion placed in water will sort of expand again. So water went from where to where? So putting a dried up onion in water, it makes the onion piece to get sort of bigger again, like expand. So obviously water went from one place to another. So where did it go? Yeah. So water moved from the beaker into the onion cells, right? So if you were to follow the path of water, it's going into the cell, all right? So that is a form of osmosis, okay? We see osmosis. What if you then take that onion and put it in salt water? Which way is water moving? Out, right? Out of the cell, all right? Because the salt sort of like draw out the water. Okay, so when you put a dried up, so this is a shriveled up piece of onion in water, okay, we see the water moving in. Sorry, can you see this is too small? So shriveled up, this is shriveled up onion. So what would the arrow be? If I were to draw an arrow to show the direction of the movement of water, so water is going into the cells. Eventually, the cell will like expand. Okay, so water coming in. Now, this solution, the solution here, okay, that's water. Now, compared to the concentration of water, or concentration of the solution in here, versus the concentration of the solution in the cell, which one is more concentrated, in the cell or in the beaker? In the cell, right? There are basically more things dissolved in the cell than in the beaker, right? Because this is just pure water. Alright, so what we call then this water is hypotonic solution. Hypotonic solution. We say that cell is sitting in, or cell is placed in a hypotonic solution. Okay? Hypotonic solution. So what does the word hypotonic mean? Below strength. Okay? Hypo means under, hyper means like over, right? Hyperactive is like very active, hyper. Hypo is like the opposite of hyper. Okay, so hypotonic solution says that the strength is not as great as the strength of the cell. Alright, so we're always comparing the solution of one versus the other. Alright, the cell is sitting in hypotonic solution. In other words, the cell has the solution that's greater than the surrounding solution. Okay, if we were to compare this with like number, because it's easier to see with a number, 2% OJ orange juice versus 100% orange juice. Which one is greater? Like concentration, the strength of the concentration, which is greater with 100% orange juice, right? Okay, just put this to the side, you know, just a little bit of math. 100 ml of 2% OJ juice versus 10 ml of 100% OJ. Which one is greater? That's the strength of the solution.
100%.
Wait,
Yeah, still
100%, right?
Yeah, it's still 100%.
It's not about the amount, it's about the concentration, right? That's something that students always, like, it throws them off. Well, they look at the amount. We don't care what the amount is. For example, if you were to buy a 2% OJ juice and drink it and compare it to 100%, this is definitely gonna taste sweeter and like stronger than this 2%. This would be like diluted OJ, right? Whether you drink one sip of this versus like whole cup of it, it will taste the same. The concentration doesn't change based on the amount, right? Okay, so let's go back. So this is hypo, so we can compare that. Which one would be 2% and which one would be 100% OJ? The cell or the water in the beaker? Yeah.
The cells are
Yeah, in comparison, we can say the cell is 100% OJ and this is 2% OJ. All right? Or it could be any number as long as the percentage is greater in the cell than the beaker. We can say that the water in the beaker is always hypotonic solution. Okay, so what did we say earlier? When cell is in the hypotonic solution, water move from where? From the beaker into the cell, right? That's how the cell responded. This cell responded by gaining water when it was sitting in hypotonic solution. Okay. Now, what if then you have really just normal cell and you place in salt water, really salt, high concentration of salt solution? What will happen to the cell? Well, how will water move? Water moves out, right? So it will make the cell shrivel up. Okay, so what do we say that the salt solution for this is? The cell is sitting in hypertonic solution. Okay? The cell is sitting in hypertonic solution. In this case, water moves from cell to out. Okay? And that's, right, this is logic. Okay? So it's comparing. Alright, I'm gonna end there, but for homework, please read chapter 7, section 3, page 2A on, and take
What do you mean come? Oh, I didn't see.
Alright, so